lost over 30 pounds
Mm.
in a month. Now, of course, anyone that's into fitness is going to say, well, that's not possible. You can't lose 30 pounds of fat in a month. I didn't say 30 pounds of fat. And I actually agree with you that you would not typically lose 30 pounds of fat in a month. That'd be ridiculous and unhealthy. What I am suggesting, though, is that when a body is inflamed and sick, not to mention when your metabolism is screwed up because of Hashimoto's, their metabolism's not working well, then I am suggesting, yes, you absolutely could be holding water weight. There's extra stuff that happens with inflammation. So all the stuff that she was holding on to just started shedding away, and she felt better, not just because of the weight loss, but because of the inflammation just generally going lower. All right, episode number 2 with the Autoimmune Recovery Lab. We're back with Ryan. And if you guys listened to the first one, well, if you didn't listen to the first one, please listen to the first one. We kind of talked about the why of the Autoimmune Recovery Lab. I don't think it's just some generic origin story. I think it is important for people to hear why we're even qualified to do this and what we're doing now. But this podcast is going to be more the how. And please make sure you're following us. Of course, we're going to share content all the time that talks about the how. You can't just do it in one podcast. But if you never listen to anything else about autoimmune conditions, I truly think that this first 30 minutes especially is going to be some of the most important stuff that you could ever hear, because we are not sharing our opinions on things. We are sharing actual science as to the good news about autoimmune conditions. So, Ryan, welcome back, my friend.
Glad to be here. Excited to be talking about how autoimmune conditions actually develop and what we can do about it.
And you guys are in for a treat because Ryan and I both know clinical stuff, but he's always kind of like a step ahead with it. So there's definitely going to be some really interesting information here. I'll start off, though, because I can always explain this part well. I'll start off, though, with the thing that got me so excited, and it was cool to talk to you about this later down the road because I realized that you had got equally excited when you first saw this. So with autoimmune conditions, we kind of knew in the functional medicine space, if you will, that what we were doing was working. And it wasn't just theoretical. We knew that you should make dietary changes. You probably should work on the person's gut and all this kind of stuff. And we were seeing consistent outcomes. But then there was a report that came out that showed that there was some necessary components for almost all autoimmune conditions. And again, under the assumption that you did listen to the first podcast, maybe you went back and did it right now and then came back to this one, you would have known we wanted to say it correctly. We didn't want to insult anyone or dismiss anyone by saying like, Evan, Ryan, you're telling me something like psoriasis is kind of similar to something like MS? That's ridiculous. Well, no, we're not talking about the things that the person experiences or deals with symptomology-wise, but what actually makes this up. When you look at the science, it's kind of similar. So there are 3 buckets. That's one way to visualize it. Probably a better way to visualize it for audio only if someone's like listening to this while driving. I like our stool analogy, right? A 3-legged stool, because if you rip out one of the legs from the stool, well, that means the stool's going to collapse. Now, normally that would suck. Your stool's broken. But today that's a good thing because the stool is the autoimmune condition. So if you can figure out how to get these legs either taken out or addressed in some way, you are going to have much better outcomes for your health. So I'll start with the high level overview, and then maybe we can kind of break down each one back and forth together. So what are these 3 components? What happened? What was reported? We found out that almost every single autoimmune condition needs these 3 things. You need the genetic predisposition. And Ryan and I always joke, it's kind of a lame joke in the health space, but I think it's a good one. People like us don't even like genetically modified food. I don't want to see genetically modified humans. So there is nothing you can do about this one. We're not going to sugarcoat that. If you have the genes for something, you have the genes. There are people out there that are working on technology right now as we record this to modify some of that for the healthcare space. That is actually happening. I wouldn't bank on that being available to you tomorrow. So don't think, hey, I'm just going to skate by for 10 years and maybe I don't have to change my diet. So we'll kind of skip over that one pretty fast because there's only so much we can do about it. Genetic component. Number 2, this is interesting. They found that you need an environmental trigger or triggers. So we'll break that down in depth today. And then number 3, and thank God they looked into this because this condition, if you will, in and of itself was almost considered pseudoscience not too long ago. And now we know it's a component of almost all autoimmune conditions. That's increased intestinal permeability. And in layman's terms, that's leaky gut. That's what you might see people using on social media just because it's easier to say that than intestinal permeability. And I say increased because the intestines are always somewhat permeable. It's not a perfect structure, but increased intestinal permeability means that it's gotten to a point that now stuff that we are consuming into our body is actually getting into the bloodstream, and that's when it leads to issues. So, Ryan, I'd love to know, because your clinical brain totally will have a favorite here. What is your favorite one of those 3 things that we'd like to start?
I didn't know I was going to have to pick a favorite. Yeah, you did an awesome job of breaking that down really simply. And by the way, that model comes from Alessio Fasano. So he's like a world-renowned researcher in the functional medicine space. That model or approach is often referred to as Fasano's triad. But, we like to think of it as like a three-legged stool. These are the three prerequisites underlying essentially all autoimmune conditions. And I know we're going to talk about this more, but the reason that's very hopeful, even though we can't change our genetic destiny, so to speak, is that we have a lot of control over the environmental component and over the intestinal permeability component, which we call leaky gut. So I don't know if I had to pick a favorite, yeah, I would pick the environmental triggers bucket or that leg of the stool, because that actually shows us what we hear this term all the time in our world, what the actual root causes are, right? You could even say that these triggers or root causes, those terms are interchangeable. Those triggers are what are driving, in most cases, the leaky gut. So you could say that the leaky gut is actually sort of downstream or a symptom of what these triggers are. So if we were to really simplify it down, we could say the most important thing we really want to focus on among those three buckets, putting most of our effort and energy towards, would be those environmental triggers. And those can be pretty vast, right? It's simple on the surface. Once you dig underneath the hood and see like, well, what constitutes an environmental trigger, that can actually be, a lot of things, and they could be different for different people.
There's almost this kind of, unfortunately, a synergistic relationship there, because I'm thinking about what happens when someone does get a leaky gut. Well, now certain foods that they're consuming could end up being triggers.
That's
so
right.
You're totally correct in that the environmental triggers are one of the main things that can make up the intestinal permeability. But then somewhat ironically, the intestinal permeability can now create new triggers for the individuals. You see why people get stuck in these cycles and why so many individuals would never even think about the idea that, I could somehow feel better one day, or I could lessen these symptoms. But one thing I will challenge people with just from the get-go is autoimmune conditions are notoriously known to go into remission for random periods of time. Like, you'll hear all the time of these random conditions like, I just didn't get psoriasis for 3 years and then it came back. And I always find that fascinating. These are like the little nuggets I want to leave in people's heads so that they're thinking about this stuff. So what happened during the 3 years when you didn't have the condition? What was going on in your life for the 3 years where you felt better with your Hashimoto's? What was going on for 3 years when you felt better with, or looked better with your vitiligo, or whatever it might be? So there has to be something there. I'm not always saying that it's just as simple as the things that we laid out today, but certainly this is making up the conditions, and there is something that we can do about 2 out of 3 of these components. Someone out there's working on that third one, or the first one rather, but that's not our wheelhouse, and we're not going to get into that. All right, so let's break down maybe some examples of triggers. I feel like I jumped us ahead almost by suggesting that a food sensitivity could be a trigger. It's accurate, but we're getting a little ahead. So what are some known triggers for a lot of the common autoimmune conditions? Because again, these things are not even just our opinions. There are scientific papers that show this bacteria, this metal can trigger an autoimmune condition. So I'd love to talk about some of those.
Sure. And not only what's been shown to be demonstrated as a trigger in the clinical literature, but also what we've seen clinically in the real world and practice, right? Just over and over and over again. And a step further than that, when we resolve these triggers, as I've seen in myself, we'll often seen a pretty precipitous drop in those antibodies, assuming they could be measured. Like in the case of Hashimoto's disease, we have TPO antibodies, we have thyroglobulin antibodies, right? And typically we'll see these drop, sometimes like a rock, like pretty quickly when we address these triggers. And for the most part, when we see a drop in antibodies, we see a pretty equivalent improvement in the overall symptom presentation for how somebody feels, right? That's really important. Obviously, that's what we're trying to accomplish. So the triggers, to keep it simple for now, we could drill deeper into this. So we have these 3 buckets or prerequisites for autoimmunity. And then once we get into that environmental trigger bucket, there's essentially like 4 or 5 buckets in that category, right? Speaking very broadly. But some of those major categories of environmental triggers, I would say probably the biggest 2 would be toxin exposure, right? That can be tested for, by the way. That toxin exposure, we're looking at 3, yet drilling down even further into 3 categories. We have mycotoxins, which come from mold, which we get exposed through mold through a water damaged building. Number 2, we have heavy metals. Number 3, we have what's called environmental toxins, parabens, phthalates, BPA, pesticides, etc. Right? Toxins is a big driver of autoimmunity. Number 2 would be pathogens, or what we just like to say is bugs, right? Bugs can include bacterial infections, viruses, parasites, fungi, which includes mold and yeast, right? So there's a lot we can look at there by testing the gut and seeing which of these bugs or pathogens might be present in someone's system. In many cases, those bugs are either driving intestinal permeability or leaky gut, and or they're also promoting a lot of inflammation in the body, which inflammation in general is just a big driver of autoimmunity. I would also say that's another environmental trigger is inflammation, right? Or they're contributing to some underlying immune dysregulation, which that gets very complex once we start talking about B cells and T cells and all the kind of functional immunology there. But we'll just call it immune imbalance or immune dysregulation. So we've got toxins, we've got bugs, we have food sensitivities or food antigens, right? The biggest of which in the autoimmune world, I'd love to talk about this more, is gluten, right? There are other common triggers for autoimmunity, dairy, soy, but they can be all over the place. You know, we've tested people, you've seen this as well. I remember one of the first, it was the MRT, was the first food sensitivity test I ran on myself. Just seemingly random things showed up on there. Carrots, mango. I think this was a long time ago, about 10 years ago. So you never really know what could end up representing an inflammatory food in your system, at least in the short term. So toxins, food triggers, pathogens or bugs, right? I would count stress, mental and emotional life stress, as being like a major driving factor. Sometimes even overlooked or like kind of the elephant in the room for autoimmunity. We know that the data suggests that those that have experienced one or more adverse childhood experiences or ACEs before the age of 18 are much more inclined to develop chronic illnesses, whether those are autoimmune diseases or otherwise, right? Like the data is really clear on that, right? So I do believe stress is a major factor. And then that kind of fifth one I would add to the list would be nutrient deficiencies. And that can include deficiencies in either vitamins or minerals. You know, why is that important? Well, that's the fuel for our body, right? So we need these vitamins and minerals to engage and activate all of the thousands upon millions of metabolic processes that occur in the body on a moment-to-moment basis. They all rely on nutrients as cofactors to do their job. So if we don't have the right fuel in the body, and by the way, the immune system, I like to say it's very resource intensive. It's like a nutrient hog, right? Your immune system needs an abundance of different, vitamin D, vitamin A, zinc, vitamin C, B vitamins, magnesium, the list goes on. And without these key nutrients, our immune system can become exhausted or dysregulated and not be able to do its job. So it's really, really simple, right? Like if you were to put sand in the gas tank of your car, it's not going to run. Why would we expect the human body to be any different? Right? So essentially, like modern Frankenstein processed food or food products, you used that term earlier, like these are not real foods that the body actually recognizes. Of course, like the body's going to start to break down or become dysfunctional if it doesn't have the right nutrients or the fuel that it needs to do its job. We can't run on sand. So I think that should be pretty obvious. I'll just throw this in there really quickly. If you ask the average person, like, do you think it's ridiculous if in my dog's or cat's or dog's water bowl, I put like Coca-Cola in there? And they go, I would never in a million years thinking of that's like, I'm going to poison my dog, right? And it's like, well, why do you think humans are different, right? No, my cat or dog needs water, but like we can somehow kind of like bend reality like towards our favor. Like we love to like make all kinds of cute justifications for things.
Yes.
Right. But, or like a house plant needs water, sunlight, healthy soil, right? Like you can't really break those rules. And if you do, the plant, it's going to do its best to maintain homeostasis and survive, but eventually it's going to die. right? So that's sort of what we were hinting at the last podcast, this kind of mismatch between our biology and the modern environment. Like we're breaking the rules all over the place and not really giving our biology what it needs. And that stress accumulates over time. It compromises our immune system. That makes us more vulnerable to pathogens. And that's just kind of like a vicious spiral. And that's creating this inflammatory environment, which then kind of tilts the scales towards autoimmunity. So that was kind of a long answer, but there you go.
Well, it's great. And I actually, if I can, I wanted to add one more really common one that's a trigger and causes intestinal permeability that almost everyone is exposed to in America and many other countries around the world: glyphosate.
Yeah.
And so that would fall in one of those categories. I'd call it a toxin.
Yeah, and the toxin.
Yeah. Some people would not look at it that way. They would just say, oh, this is great for my garden. But yes, we're going to categorize it as a toxin. Glyphosate, for those that don't know, is the main ingredient in Roundup.
Right.
And I don't care if I got sued for talking crap about this company. I think they're one of the nastiest companies that ever existed. And I think anyone can just do a quick history of the company to figure out that that's true. So Monsanto, they are the same company that does the GMOs and all that kind of stuff. They created Roundup, and then they were bought out, unironically, by Bayer, the pharmaceutical company, several years ago, which is kind of ridiculous. I really need people to think that through. So a company that creates genetically modified foods, things like Roundup, was bought out by a pharmaceutical company. If that's not a slap in the face, I don't really know what is, but I digress. So glyphosate, one of the things that it does when human beings exposed to this is we know that it increases intestinal permeability. And all of the stuff that we're saying, remember, there is some, we wouldn't list anything to you guys that you can't do something about. But one of the things that you do need to know is that if you're listening to this and you're in the United States and you live here, that is in your body. To some degree, glyphosate is probably in your body. Now, whether or not it's in high enough amounts that we can measure it in urine is a different story, but this is in our rainwater now. It's in rivers, it's in lakes. What happens is when you use this in mass and in farming and all this stuff, it starts to get absorbed in the environment. So we now know the rainwater falling on you.
Up to 50% of rainwater has glyphosate.
Which is crazy. Or you'll see it in national parks where it wasn't even used there, but because rainwater has come in and dropped all this stuff there, we now have this in our beautiful national parks as well. So this is not to fearmonger ever. There's always something that you can do about the things that we're talking about, but it is actually to show you how big the problem is at the same time. Because if you understand that, then you start to realize, oh, this is why I don't feel great. This is why I have this condition. I'm up against all of this. Ryan and I know this stuff inside and out, and there's still things that we have to do on a weekly basis and check ourselves. Like I was missing the gluten thing recently, right? Separate story for a separate time, but I ran a test that just showed me I was being exposed to gluten. And I'm like, the guy who does all this stuff, this is my entire career, and I was still missing something. So I just wanted to add that one in, but then to talk overall about the environmental triggers thing, it can seem when we're listing this stuff off, again, like everything is against you. But there's ways to modify your life. There's ways to change certain things, and know that some of these are more important than others. You don't have to change everything overnight to feel dramatically better. I know one of the ones that you always kind of go to is just, hey, if I can get you to just try gluten-free for some period of time, you're usually pretty happy with that. If I can get you to start eating locally mixed with organic, and the reason I say mixed is because organic produce and organic food does not necessarily mean healthy. There's so much stuff that can be put on that still in America. So you want to kind of mix the local and organic together. I want to know where this food's coming from and that I trust the farmer. That's going to lower the glyphosate levels. The stress can't be underplayed or overplayed, I guess, overstated enough. We know too that chronic stress, mental and emotional, overexercising can also cause intestinal permeability. So it's like, what can't cause it? And it's not that any one thing is causing it more than another thing necessarily. And again, we're not trying to make it seem like everything that you're doing in your life, you're going to have to change or take away to not have a leaky gut. But all of these things in excess can do that. And really, we're just looking at it as excess levels of stress. You can kind of think of it that way. Human beings can handle some stress. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this because I hate poking at him for it. But my dad, he works outside 12 hours a day, but he smokes. He doesn't eat that well, but he feels overall great because of his lifestyle outside. So of course the human body can handle some stress. We're not telling you guys you got to take all this stuff away, but you do need to be aware that everything that we just listed off is subject to causing issues for those with autoimmune conditions.
You can almost think of it like a bank, right? And every time you make a decision that's going to promote your health, you're making a deposit in the bank, right? Every time you make a decision that might not necessarily suit your best interests in the short or long term, you're kind of making a deposit. You're kind of making, a withdrawal from that bank, right? And so, are you making like a net positive impact on your life overall with all of the individual choices that you make each day for your health? That adds up over the long term, right? If there's a net negative, you're making these withdrawals all of the time, like, eventually you're going to have a net zero balance and you're going to owe the bank money, right? That's going to be a problem. You're going to be in debt. So that might be one way to look at it, right? Because we don't want to freak people out and thinking, you have to make all of these changes overnight. Like for me, it was a very slow and gradual process of learning and implementing and gradually kind of incorporating these strategies as they came about organically, naturally, right? Now, that being said, if I were to do it all over again, I know so much more than I did then versus what I know now. Like, I would want to fast track those results as quickly as I could and kind of stack a lot of these strategies, right? I get it. That can be overwhelming to be like radically overhauling, right? So, like sometimes when I take on a new client, I'll almost compare the process to like some of these shows on HGTV where they're doing like a complete makeover and remodel of a home, right? They're gutting out the carpets, they're tearing down sheetrock, they're putting in brand new windows, new appliances, right? Like in some ways that can be how it can feel like to do this complete transformation and sort of overhaul in a short period of time. You don't have to do it that way, but you're going to probably get closer to your goal if you're almost taking, I guess, almost like a boot camp approach, sort of, right? But there's also nothing wrong with doing the slow and steady wins the race approach either. It's really going to be what's more sustainable for that individual. Yeah.
Bringing this all together is probably going to be one of our favorite parts to talk about. We can't do anything about the genetics. At least Ryan and Ev can't. So we got to get rid of that one. Can't do anything about that. The environmental triggers, 100% we can do something about. The leaky gut, we can 100% do something about. And in fact, if you're working on one, you're probably helping the other. The question then would be, if I'm listening right now, how do you do this? Like, what? Like we're talking about these bacterial things, whatever. It's like, do I have to go to my doctor? Are they going to run a glyphosate test on me or something like that? And the reality is probably no, that's not going to happen. But thankfully, most people don't realize we have access, even as consumers, to these lab tests that can show us if we have these triggers going on in our body. So there's hundreds and hundreds of good lab tests out there. What Ryan and I have done with the Autoimmune Recovery Lab is we've kind of taken the ones that we believe are most helpful. And that's a principle in functional medicine that's kind of hard for people to understand at first. Less sometimes is more. And there is a huge law of diminishing return with lab tests.
Oh, yeah.
If you have $1 million to spend on your health, Ryan and I, even again, you say, I don't care, guys, spend it. We would never say go run 100 tests. There's just a point where that doesn't help. We might look at 100 markers, by the way, but at 100 individual tests, that's not going to help anything. We'll be doing a 5-year protocol trying to figure all that out. There's also a difference, too, between having no lab tests. There's some people out there that advocate in the natural health space, which you guys might see, and we always encourage you to do your own research, like read into stuff and make your own decisions. But Ryan and I would never suggest to someone, if they do have the finances, to completely ignore the lab testing side as well. You can feel a lot better, even if you don't do the labs. We can tell you guys how to do some of that stuff. But the lab test is always going to be the number one option so that you can figure out in your unique body what is triggering your autoimmune condition, what's triggering your body to not feel well. So out of these tests that we use, I don't even know where to start. I think I'd want to start with an easy one if I can, in the food sensitivity category. Now, this one's tough. Food sensitivities sometimes are the cause of the autoimmune condition. More often than not, I'd say that they're a result of the setting that is leading to the autoimmune condition, and it's just exacerbating
They can be
issues.
both a cause and a symptom.
Yes. Classic example of this is gluten and celiac disease. So with celiac disease, it's one of the ones that people typically know a little bit more. Even if they don't understand it, they might have heard of celiac disease. You're talking about a direct trigger from when this person consumes something with gluten in it. So what actually happens, and this is kind of interesting to put together for autoimmune conditions, what happens with celiac? They consume that gluten, it directly attacks the small intestine, causing an intestinal permeability situation, and this person is not feeling great and gets sick. What's also fascinating with celiac in particular is that a lot of those people, not all, but a lot don't even report GI symptoms. They'll report skin issues, mental health issues. A lot of them will get thyroid autoimmune conditions or other autoimmune issues. And it's usually when they go in for one of those things that they get the eventual diagnosis of the celiac disease. So it's kind of interesting that even with the one little, it's like kind of an anomaly in the world of autoimmune condition, because we know gluten's not great for any autoimmune condition, but that one's probably the king. Like that is the worst, because when I consume this, it directly attacks my small intestine, making things 10 times worse. It's kind of interesting that that still even has the same core components of what would make up an autoimmune condition for someone with MS, right? So yes, with all that said, with the food sensitivity side, know that when we talk about these food sensitivities, it doesn't always mean that that was the core cause, but you can help someone feel phenomenally better very quickly when they identify the foods that they're sensitive to. I had a personal client, Kate, years ago. She, by the way, we never share client stories that haven't given us permission. When you do good work, they typically want you to share it. So this is something she shared on her own social media and tagged me directly at the time. She was very new to all this stuff. And this is not something we typically offer at the Autoimmune Recovery Lab. There are cases for it, so give us a call if you're interested, but usually we wouldn't go this route. She was so new to this functional side and so sick, I made the rare decision to say, hey, I think we're going to just start with like 1 or 2 labs here. And this is not shaming Kate. I actually give her huge props for being able to go all in. She was pregnant. She was going to have a kid, her firstborn, and she wanted to be super mom. She did not want to be sick anymore. She wanted to get all this stuff under control. And like Ryan, she actually had Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So we started with just the food sensitivity test because this was a person who was at the time eating McDonald's a couple times a week, eating out a couple times a week. Her family and her were not like buying organic food or anything like that. So we look into the things that she's sensitive to, and she had a very common kind of panel for someone with an autoimmune condition. And we might get to talk about this today. We might not. It's not super important. But what you'll see with autoimmune patients a lot is gluten sensitivity pretty much for sure. You can almost guarantee that, especially if you do other tests outside of the one that we did and really dive into the gluten sensitivity side. Dairy, they typically don't do so well with that. And then I find if the progression or the disease has progressed a little bit or they've had it for some time, nightshades are often a huge issue for these people. They might react to tomatoes, peppers, certain potatoes, like it's kind of interesting. Yeah, kind of interesting, but they can get affected by that. So sure enough, her food sensitivity test came back and it could not have been scripted any better because it was so stereotypical for what I see on a lot of autoimmune clients. Wheat through the roof, all the dairy section through the roof, and different nightshade foods. It wasn't a nightshade category, but different foods that are nightshades were all lit up. So I said to her, okay, we're just starting with the basics. We're taking baby steps here. We don't, like you said, we don't have to rip up the whole house at once. You can kind of do it stage by stage. And so all I asked her, I said, I know this is a lot. You're coming from the world of fast food right now. Is that if all we can do in the next 30 days is you're going to try to remove gluten, I'll be happy. She's like, well, I think I can do the dairy thing too. I said, if you can do that, even better, but I'm not going to be like mad at you or something. You're not going to not be my client anymore. So without any other labs, with just the food sensitivity stuff, we did that. This woman, and we have the before and after photos so I can prove this, she lost over 30 pounds in a month. Now, of course, anyone that's into fitness is going to say, well, that's not possible. You can't lose 30 pounds of fat in a month. I didn't say 30 pounds of fat. And I actually agree with you that you would not typically lose 30 pounds of fat in a month. That'd be ridiculous and unhealthy. What I am suggesting, though, is that when a body is inflamed and sick, not to mention when your metabolism is screwed up because of Hashimoto's, right? A lot of those people, again, slow down. Their metabolism's not working well. Then I am suggesting, yes, you absolutely could be holding water weight. There's extra stuff that happens with inflammation. So all the stuff that she was holding on to just started shedding away, and she felt better, not just because of the weight loss, but because of the inflammation just generally going lower. Her TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, she was the only one, I bring her up all the time, dude, but she's the only person I know of that was higher than you, and your test actually maxed out. So maybe that's why. Yep. But hers was a 211. Just so I don't misspeak, you know this better offhand. What does even Western medicine consider too high of a TSH? So not functional medicine, but Western medicine.
Typically on a lab report, you get back from, say, like LabCorp, the range for TSH is going to be 0.5 to 4.5. So anything higher than that from a conventional perspective, from like a Western medical doctor, that would be considered high. So again, anything above 4.5 would be viewed as hypothyroidism, medically speaking, right? It's sort of, by the way, for those that aren't familiar, TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. It's produced by your pituitary gland, And it's sort of inversely related with your thyroid function. In other words, if your thyroid is slowing down, your pituitary will increase TSH in response to stimulate the thyroid to kind of like kick it back into gear. So the higher the TSH, the more that suggests your thyroid is slowing down. Typically, like there are some weird exceptions, but typically that's the case. So 5 is already pretty high. You know, even something above 10 would be like, wow, that's pretty extraordinarily high, right? So you're talking 211, that's like bananas, like bonkers high. Yeah.
I remember I said to her, I owed her an apology she didn't even know she deserved, because I wasn't disrespectful to her, but you know how clients don't know as much, right? So when she said 211, she just said this to me out loud on the phone. I'm like, are you sure you don't mean your thyroid antibodies? Like maybe one of your antibody categories was at a 211. And she's like, nope, it says this TSH thing. I said, cool, can I just see the lab? Because very arrogantly, I'm thinking in my head, like, okay, she does not know what she's talking about here. And I remember, I apologized to her on the phone. I said, you are correct. I have never seen this. I didn't even know your lab, again, will go that high, but she was 100% right, and it was 211 for a TSH. Now, mixed with a little help from Western medicine as well. I always want to, again, give them credit where it's due. This isn't a one or the other. She started a very low dose of thyroid medication during the same month. So 30 pounds down, her TSH was a 4.5.
Still a little high, but that's incredibly well improved. Yeah.
To be fair, I don't think we could have done that with just diet alone. I certainly don't think we could have done that with just medication alone. No doctor was like, what the heck are you doing right now? So it was those two things combined that really helped this woman out. And now the last time I talked to her, she was able, with her doctor, able to move away from those medications because we caught a lot of this stuff fairly early. She was willing to go all in. I always say moms on a mission are like the best clients. They also make some of the best practitioners too, because they will just move mountains to make it work. So that's just one example of a test that we use, quite basic one actually, and the impact that it can have on someone with an autoimmune condition. So Ryan's so great with the lab side. I actually don't know which direction you're going to take this. Yeah, let's go into another lab that we use at the Autoimmune Recovery Lab and maybe how it helped one of your clients.
I would say one of the cornerstones that we use is the GI map, stool pathogen test. If my back was against the wall, and I would say if I was only able to run one lab on someone dealing with an autoimmune condition, it would be the GI map or a stool pathogen test in general, but the GI map tends to be my preference and the one we have the most experience with. And so, there's a saying that comes from Hippocrates around 500 BC, which is that, all disease begins in the gut, right? Which also means that if all disease begins in the gut, conversely, all health begins in the gut, right? Because if you can resolve disease or dysfunction in the gut, then in theory, we can have an impact on the whole entire system, right? So, like, why is that, by the way? Like, let's kind of try to back that up. Like, all disease begins in the gut, because that seems like a pretty bold, wild claim. So there's a few different reasons for that, right? One of which we talked about, this mucosal barrier that lines our entire intestinal tract, right? That's essentially like a second skin. It's a barrier, right? So it's actually part of the immune system, actually, even though it's a layer of skin cells, sort of. It's a layer of epithelial cells that line the intestinal tract, but its purpose, just like the skin on the outside of the body, is to protect us from pathogens, to protect us from bacteria, fungi, viruses, parasites, and to prevent those pathogens from crossing that barrier and causing infection or getting into the bloodstream. Same thing with the skin on the outside of our body. That skin is there as a protective layer. If we didn't have that, we would have open wounds and infections all the time. So when you get a cut, you're likely to get an infection, or you're more susceptible to that. So if you were to unravel the surface area of that mucosal barrier in the intestinal tract, that surface area would cover about 2 tennis courts, which is mind-blowing. I can't even wrap my head around that, right? So we're talking about a lot of surface area that's protecting us from, potential foreign threats or invaders, right? So that's part of the backdrop. We also have something like 30 to 40 trillion gut bacteria in our microbiome that composes collectively what we call our microbiome. And many of those bacterial families or species are helping to regulate our immune system, to train certain immune cells, to promote immune tolerance. So our immune system does not lose the ability to distinguish between our self and non-self, right? So your immune system doesn't start accidentally or mistakenly attacking our body's own tissue, right? So your gut bacteria actually play a role in that. We also have about 80% of all of our immune cells are housed in the gut. So why is that? Why is 80% of our immune system in the gut and not in our lungs or in our heart or somewhere else, right? If you just kind of think that through, well, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? Like we have a big hole in our face called our mouth, right? Where we take in food and water every single day. And that's how foreign microbes are introduced into our system every day on a day-to-day basis. So we have all of these microbes getting into our system. Like, yeah, we ought to have an abundance of immune cells in the intestinal tract that are kind of surveilling the area and protecting us from foreign threats, right? So there's a lot going on there. Those are just a few examples of like why the gut is sort of the seat of health. And another quick example is that up to 95% of serotonin is produced in the gut. And the gut is often referred to as the second brain, right? Because we have so many neurons in the gut environment. So that could be a masterclass in and of itself. There's so much going on in the gut environment. But when you have the presence of a bug or pathogen or multiple bugs, which we can detect on the GI map, bringing it back full circle to the testing, we can test for things like H. pylori, general gut dysbiosis, parasites, yeast like Candida. We can also look at the health of the intestinal environment. How well are you digesting your food? How resilient is your gut immunity? Like we can measure that through secretory IgA. We can see if you're recirculating toxins in your gut back into the liver, which can be a really big problem. We can detect signs of inflammation in your gut. So there's a lot we could see from that one stool test, right? So in terms of its relationship to autoimmunity and why I think the GI map is so foundational as a test for anyone with autoimmunity is, and I'll start simply here, is that these bugs or pathogens are the kind of trigger, going back to the environmental trigger concept, or the root cause in many cases of the intestinal permeability. So you have a parasite like Giardia or a nasty bacterial bug like C. diff. Well, they can actually cause breakdown and destruction to that very thin, delicate mucosal barrier. So that would be like your skin on your arm breaking down. Now, the contents of the gut lumen, the interior of the gut, that's housing all these trillions of bacteria and undigested food proteins, maybe toxins like glyphosate, it's like a free-for-all. They can all kind of freely pass through that mucosal barrier, which is now broken down, and they're now getting into the bloodstream where they don't belong. And that is sort of like DEFCON 5 for the immune system. It's like red alert. Now it's sending in all of these first responder immune cells initially, like neutrophils and macrophages. They try to kind of like deal with it and clean up the mess. But when they get overwhelmed, they start calling in specialized adaptive immune cells like B cells and T cells. And that's where things can get a little bit hairy, where essentially you can have a scenario where you have a toxin, a food antigen, or a bug getting into systemic circulation in your bloodstream. And let's use the gluten example, for example. The gluten is leaking through the gut lining, which should be nice and kind of sound, right? But now you have these kind of like micro tears or this intestinal permeability, this leaky gut. So gluten proteins are getting through there, leaking into the bloodstream. Now, these gluten proteins have these peptide sequences, almost like a sort of like a code, right? And so the immune system can recognize the proteins on the gluten through the protein or peptide sequences. The problem occurs, and by the way, we call this molecular mimicry, and I don't want to get people too bogged down in the science, but this is essentially a situation where your immune system starts producing antibodies or starts attacking the gluten proteins with a certain kind of signature, like a peptide sequence. Think of it like a signature. And, well, the signature looks very, very similar to a protein signature in my thyroid tissue. All right, so now my immune system starts mistakenly attacking my thyroid gland or my muscle and joint tissue, or in the case of lupus, the actual proteins in the nucleus of your cells, which can become like a whole systemic problem, not just localized to a specific organ. So yeah, you have this kind of issue where through molecular mimicry, your immune system, in an attempt to protect you, is mistakenly attacking your body's own tissue. And I really emphasize that point to say mistakenly, because it's not a betrayal. Your immune system's not stupid, right? It's trying to protect you, but it's losing the ability to distinguish between self and non-self, like your own cells in your body versus some foreign object that shouldn't be there. So once again, bringing this all back to the GI map and the gut test, if we can identify and also eradicate or eliminate these different contributing factors to leaky gut, whether it's a parasite, H. pylori, or we see signs of gluten exposure on the GI map, which, by the way, there is a marker for that called anti-gliadin IgA, which can detect this immune reactivity to gluten. We remove those interferences to healing, those kind of triggers or root causes, and then guess what? Your mucosal barrier, your gut lining, has the ability to self-repair within just 3 days. Like, that's how quickly your gut lining can repair itself. But if it's constantly being assaulted and bombarded, it just never has the chance to heal itself and repair itself. So then, yeah, you keep having all of these nasty things, these foreign objects leaking through there, overwhelming and exhausting the immune system, contributing to this molecular mimicry or bystander effect, where you've got these kind of like, innocent bystanders, your body's own cells or tissue getting caught in the crossfire while your immune system is like waging war against these foreign objects. So until you do that, there's things you could do to manage the symptoms, but until you remove those triggers. Now, let's say someone was kind of new to this journey, where might they start? Well, if they weren't ready yet to take that journey of running those lab tests, the first place I would start would be eliminating gluten from the diet. Like, we know that from like a wealth of clinical publications that are openly available on PubMed, that gluten has been demonstrated to be essentially the number one trigger or perpetuator for leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So, and this, by the way, this intestinal permeability, this leaky gut, this is kind of universal to all autoimmune conditions, right? So if whether it was lupus, MS, a pseudo autoimmune condition like endometriosis, Hashimoto's, lichen sclerosis, we can go on and on with this, right? With over 100 autoimmune diseases out there. But, that would be my starting place, right? First and foremost, like if you're not doing that, we may not really get very far. Or at least, like you said earlier, try it for 30 days, like let it prove itself to you, because I almost guarantee you're not going to want to go back. At least that's my experience most of the time with people. They don't want to go back.
Yeah, I've never had someone want to go back. And most of us can do anything for 30 days, right? Just like, again, try it our way. And then if you don't like it, try it your way again. And you might find that you don't want to do it your way anymore. The other thing worth mentioning is make sure you're doing it correctly. So the acronym that you can remember is BROW, like an eyebrow: barley, rye, oats, and wheat. Now, oats are the only thing in that list that does not inherently have gluten in it, but it's so often that they are farmed together that there's cross-contamination, not to be confused with cross-reactivity, which might really be confusing them, because I don't know if you mentioned that exact word, or molecular mimicry. But what that just means is that oats and wheat will sometime end up with each other. So now your oats that you thought were gluten-free are in fact not gluten-free. So if you just do that, if you buy yourself like a gluten enzyme, something to help digest it. So remember, it's not that you're eating gluten on purpose. It's that you are intentionally trying to remove it. But the reality is you're going to screw up in the first 30 days if you're not working with someone. It is, again, I've been doing this for years and I messed up in some way recently. That just shows you how tough this can be. So if you are intentionally trying to remove it, you do the best that you can, use ChatGPT or something like that, and taking a gluten enzyme on top of it. A lot of them work. There's many great ones out there. Then you should be able to notice the difference in 30 days. Like, we are promising you some noticeable difference. We're not promising everything's perfect in 30 days, but I've never had someone say, oh, I didn't feel anything from doing that. That's very unrealistic. I don't want to derail us here, but there was such a key point. It seems simple, but it's something that people need to understand if they were ever going to work with individuals like us. We're different than Western medicine. Western medicine sees the disease or the symptom and says, here is some medication or surgery to make you feel better. So how does our stuff work then if we're never doing something like that? Because we can't diagnose and treat even if we wanted to. What's a fair question? It was what you had said about how fast the gut lining heals and just the body healing in general. That's what we're banking on, folks. You already have this God-given or universe-given, nature-given, whatever you subscribe to, ability to heal. And that is not pseudoscience. That's not woo-woo. I can prove to you that you not only know that, but you've actually used it. If you've ever had a paper cut, if you've ever had a strained muscle, if you've ever broken a bone in your body, I don't know if you guys realize this, but like when you're in a cast for a broken bone, there's not some magic thing being released in the cast that heals your bone. The only reason we put the cast on is so that it heals the right way, in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Your body is the one that heals the broken bone. Your body is the one that says, hey, and this is incredible if you actually take the time to think about it and don't take it for granted because it's something you've seen your whole life. Your body can recognize, well, this host that I'm in somehow screwed up and my finger now has this cut. I need to do things to make sure that this is all back together. That's kind of unbelievable that we live in this vessel that can do that. So we're banking on this same thing when it comes to autoimmune conditions, or really almost any condition in the functional space. We're removing the stressors, we're removing those triggers so that your body's healing ability can win. Basically what happens, and this is a little oversimplified, but it's fundamentally accurate. When you have a disease state like an autoimmune condition, you have basically put too much stress and demand on the body to the point that it is outweighing the natural healing ability that's happening every single day.
That's a brilliant way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at it like that, that's why, well, this is also where people get confused. Like, why can my dad smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day and he's fine? For whatever reason, and some of this can be genetic, my dad might have more resilience than some people, that can be accurate, but it's still fundamentally true that right now, at least in his life, my dad is able to heal better and faster than he is putting stress on the body, even with something like smoking. So we're removing the triggers, we're helping you out with the other things so that your body can do what it does best, which is get you healthy and make you feel great again. And I just hope people get that point, because I do think it's a disconnect when they get into this world of functional healthcare. They're like, what are you going to give me? What am I going to take? And yes, you can utilize a supplement, you can utilize a diet. That's not the same as taking something or directly doing something for that. You're certainly not going to get a surgery from either of us. And if we start offering that, call the cops, because we're not supposed to be doing that. So what we have to do is bank on removing the stressors so that your body can actually, quite frankly, do the heavy work for us.
Yeah, when you boil it down, what we're doing with this functional approach is it's really simple. We're not just removing the interferences to healing, to that innate healing capacity that we're born with, but we're also giving the body what it needs, right? So not just kind of focusing too much on these bad things like the triggers that make us sick. Like, yeah, we have to remove those, but there's also certain inputs, right? Like we have to give the body what it needs to build that resilience. So there's kind of like these two components to it. But when you really boil it down, that's kind of the whole entire approach. Remove the things that are getting in the way of healing and promote the things that facilitate healing.
It's such a good point too, because it's not like your body is going to just do this automatically at the same level every day. If we could send you to a private island with your family and the people that you love, and you have no bills, nothing to worry about, and you can just sit on that island, and then we're going to do our lab tests and other stuff, yes, I would bet money you're going to heal notably faster than someone that's working 60 hours a week, has 4 kids right now, and they're like, hey, I'll do the labs, I'll change my diet, but there's nothing else I can do about this lifestyle that I'm currently in. That's fine. We might have to make changes there over time. Some of this stuff can take a while. Listen, the year is going to pass anyway. 2 years is going to pass anyway. You might as well start taking the steps so that 1 to 2 years from now looks a lot better for you.
It's sort of like choose your version of hard. I think, both of us like to say this all the time. It's like living with chronic illness is incredibly difficult and hard. Making change can be scary and hard, right? But choose your hard, right?
Yes.
Like that time's going to go by either way. And like I might as well be trying to move in the direction of optimizing my health and feeling better if I have the choice, right? So when I was first diagnosed with Hashimoto's and I'd spent, 10 years living with chronic illness, that was pretty tough. That was like a scary journey, right? And at a certain point, I had to make sort of a decision, right, towards that personal development journey of making a major transformation in my mindset and realizing, in a sense, I know this can sound pretty like maybe harsh, kind of like in an existential way, but like no one was coming to save me, right? My family, my friends, my doctors, like I had to do the work. And that was that kind of, it's almost impossible to divorce the diet and lifestyle stuff from this kind of personal development side, because I had to essentially transform who I was as a person fundamentally, and my mindset and how I viewed the world. And taking kind of this like radical responsibility approach. But the thing I kept coming back to is like, what other option do I have to stay like this? Right? Like the pain of staying the same, like far outweighed the pain of the change,
Yep.
right? Now, this is maybe a little bit off topic, but still related. And I wish this was a little bit different, but I think it's just human nature. The majority of the time when people come to work with us, they're usually not feeling really well, right? Like they're not coming to us saying, "Hey, I feel great. I just want to kind of be proactive and run these labs and
I wish, but
get ahead of things," right? Like most people don't take that approach where the plane is grounded on the runway and they're saying, "I'm going to go through my pre-flight checklist," right? Most people wait until the plane is crashing midair and the house is on fire and they're kind of panicking and they want to feel better yesterday, right? And we'll have to explain to them, "Hey, look, you're pretty deeply entrenched in dysfunction at this point." Okay, so to give someone a picture of what, by the time you have an autoimmune disease, these hidden stressors in the body have probably been persisting for years, right? Like that autoimmune condition didn't show up overnight. We talked about on the last podcast, it takes an average of about 5 years to receive a diagnosis for an autoimmunity. So by the time we're working with someone and we're doing a full, complete lab investigation, as like working as like health detectives almost, right? Now, you hear this term root cause, a lot of people imagine there's going to be like this single thing we find, and it's gluten sensitivity, or it's like a parasite, or it's a heavy metal like mercury or arsenic. I've been doing this for 10 years, right? I've run thousands of labs. I've been a clinical advisor for other health practitioners. So I've seen a lot of lab work. I've seen a lot of different cases and what people are struggling with. 9.99% of the time, there is no singular root cause. There's a multitude, right, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts is what I like to say. And so that person might be dealing with multiple gut infections, multiple toxins in their system, heavy metals, pesticides, mycotoxins, multiple, they're deficient in iron, B12, vitamin D, iron, zinc, whatever it might be, right? And so like there's a lot of work to do there. We have all the puzzle pieces, but there's not a, what does Reed Davis say? I think I've heard him say there's no like speedboating your way to health.
Yeah.
It's going to take time, right? So we talked about in the last podcast that on average, it takes someone about 4.5 years to actually receive an autoimmune diagnosis, which means that issue has actually been persisting for up to 5 years.
And that's one of the things that I hope people are starting to get, like even when we're mentioning this crazy stuff, like the various food sensitivities, the pathogens in their gut. We mentioned this, I think, in the first podcast and probably earlier in this one as well. This is not an overnight problem. You didn't wake up one day and just have an autoimmune condition. This is why that autoimmune spectrum stuff is really interesting. I think this is why they have symptoms for so long before they ever get the diagnosis, because maybe your gut was a little bit leaky, so that was your skin issue. Or your gut was a little bit leaky, that was your chronic headaches or whatever, right? So it's the culmination of all these things over a long period of time that leads to the person getting the diagnosis, which is crazy considering how long it takes the average person to even get diagnosed. Like we can actually hold off for a while and there's still hope for it. But can you imagine if we were catching this stuff earlier? It'd be great.
We need to be doing that. And that's part of our mission, right? That's why we believe in the whole test, don't guess philosophy. And in the earlier podcasts we talked about it taking about 4.5 years between the time that the autoimmune diagnosis actually begins until they actually receive the diagnosis. In my own case, I believe it was between 10 to 15 years. My antibodies were in the thousands for Hashimoto's when it was first detected, right? I can't go back in time and prove that, but I highly suspect it probably started by the time I was a teenager, right? And the important thing for people to understand in terms of managing their expectations is when they go to do this type of work with running the test, doing this test, don't guess approach, and working with a functional practitioner, they have to understand that they've likely had years, maybe decades of hidden stress accumulating in their system, and it may take some patience and time to really actually sort through all of that. Yeah.
I know that we've talked about this a million times on other podcasts, not our own though, the 7-year thing with lupus. So there was this study done. It's kind of creepy when you think about it, but these military folks had their blood samples saved over a long period of time.
Right.
And then they went back, and those that got diagnosed with lupus, we actually found, what was it, 93%? Is that the right number?
I don't remember
Pretty close to 91, 93.
It's about right.
Either way, close enough for the sake of the conversation. So it was either 91 or 93% of the individuals that got diagnosed with lupus, we were able to see some of the stuff in their blood 7 years before they had symptoms. So we didn't say diagnosis, before they had symptoms of the condition. So that's another way to prove to you guys that this stuff is probably going on for many, many years before you wind up there.
Yeah.
So if anything, again, a lot of this health stuff's a personal development journey. You need to learn to flip your mindset with things. And I don't mean positive thinking for the sake of positive thinking. I mean it practically. It is a legitimate thing to be grateful for, that you could secretly be sick for a decade, get diagnosed with something 5 years after you have symptoms, screw around with Western medicine for 2 or 3 years, finally come to a functional practitioner and still have hope to feel actually amazing again, like Ryan and I do. That's something we should truly be grateful for. I don't think that's positive thinking woo-woo. I think it's amazing that the body has a chance after potentially 10, 20 years of abuse.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just data, right? Like, yeah, it's not just positive thinking. We're actually able to see what's going on in the body. And we like to say, with the lab testing, we're able to end the guesswork, the cycle of trial and error. You know, we know so many people that for years that were kind of jumping from doctor to doctor. And, you know, maybe I've read vitamin D might be helpful. Maybe zinc will be helpful. Like, they're trying these different things, but they don't really have a roadmap or a structured plan. And so you have all of this detailed data and information in front of you. You know exactly what your hidden stressors are. You work with an experienced practitioner that knows all of the particular nuances about how to address those things. And again, like we talked about, not just getting rid of the bad stuff, but kind of health promoting, right? That's so important with, you know, just getting optimal sleep and eating a nutrient dense diet and reducing your stress and embracing joy, community. Like, these are all things that are really important for building resilience in your system, because we do live in a world that's where we're exposed to a lot of stressors. So we do need to understand some things about building resilience in the system.
Yeah, and it kind of stinks. I want to go off for another hour about this. I think for this particular one, we're going to have to wrap this up. We didn't even get to talk about all the different lab tests we offer and stuff. But let me conclude with this. You kind of mentioned this idea of people are taking this supplement, trying this diet, and then it doesn't work the way they want it to, which is already sad. We don't want to see people suffering needlessly for longer. Something I think that's even sadder, though, because technically this affects other people. When you take the supplement, because you heard online vitamin D is good for autoimmune condition, which is not necessarily wrong, but it's incomplete.
Right.
Or, oh, I need to just do a parasite cleanse and that's all. When it doesn't work, it's not only that you suffer longer, it's that you start to give up and think that natural medicine doesn't work. And it's like, well, no, you weren't doing this correctly because no one actually showed you how to do it. It's not that it doesn't work. And the reason I say that affects other people is because you and I can't shut up about this stuff. So we've now affected people in our lives that were never clients, just from our own testimonials. So imagine someone that has a bad experience and now they go tell their friends that also deal with their own stuff. Oh yeah, that doesn't work. You don't want to be doing that natural medicine stuff. So here's what we can promise you guys, even though we do have to wrap up for this particular episode. We do discovery calls here at Autoimmune Recovery Lab. They're 100% free. And we couldn't, some people charge for the discovery calls. We will never do that. And the reason we won't is because we know what it's like to spend needless amounts of money on your health. So we wouldn't charge you guys. So if you go to autoimmunerecoverylab.com/2, like podcast number 2, so that's the word number and then the actual digit 2. We'll have a link there for you guys where you could book in for a call with us. This is what we guarantee with our calls. You will never, ever get on a call with us and be left without something to do, even though it's free. So here's the thing. When people call us, sometimes they're not ready. Sometimes we tell them the changes that they'll have to make and they don't want to do it. We can't force them to do it, even if we'd like to. We can't make them do it. Maybe finances are an issue for a certain thing. There could be a variety of reasons that they can't do it at a particular time. So what, at the very least, we will be able to do for you on that call is say, hey, you know, you told me you were gluten-free, but you're actually eating at a restaurant every single day that I know for a fact is exposed to gluten because I just looked it up on Google or whatever. Those little tips can be invaluable. And then all we'd ask for is, you know, leave us a nice review or say something nice about us. But we will do that for free for you guys. That's our guarantee. If we can't help you and onboard you that day with the labs, we will still leave you with something to walk away with. Any final words of wisdom on your end?
I think you pretty much nailed it. Yeah, please DM us, reach out to us. Feel free to email us. We're here to help. We'd love to get you onboarded, right? Like if you're ready to take that deep dive, we're going to run a comprehensive lab workup and really leave no stone unturned. That's our goal. That's the approach I would have wanted if someone was helping me, to leave no stone unturned. And basically the idea there is we're going to create a roadmap for healing to address, any of these hidden stressors in the body one by one. And we would love to talk to you more about, getting you back on your feet and putting the autoimmune symptoms and the needless suffering behind you.
Autoimmunerecoverylab.com/the
That's right.
word number and then the actual number 2. We'll see you guys there. Thanks, Ryan.
All right. Thanks so much.